I thought I was boarding a flight to save my marriage, but somewhere over the ocean I found out my wife wasn't sitting beside me out of love, she was hiding a secret 2 rows back. What I saw mid-flight shattered everything I believed about us. I honestly believed that a simple trip to Mexico might be the thing to help fix what was slowly slipping between me and my wife. I had no idea that the real breaking point would come before we even touched the ground. The unraveling started somewhere above the clouds mid-flight, when I discovered the truth. And the person she was cheating with? That's a twist I never could have prepared for. My name's Mark. I'm 35. My wife, Emily, is 33. We've been married for 8 years now. To anyone on the outside looking in, we probably looked like one of those couples who had it all figured out. Smiles at dinner parties, vacation photos with matching sunglasses, the whole thing. But like most things, what's seen on the surface rarely tells the full story. And I truly believed we had something real. I believed in us. I just didn't realize I was the only one still holding on. A few months ago we made plans to go to Mexico. Nothing fancy, just a short trip to Cancun. We hadn't had a proper getaway in what felt like forever, and things between us had grown distant. I thought maybe some sun and quiet time would give us a chance to reset. Things had been weird for a while. Emily had become more guarded, constantly glued to her phone, and there was always a new excuse to be out late or take a work call in another room. I kept brushing it off, blaming her stress, maybe burnout from her job. I didn't want to be that husband who accuses his wife of something just because she's not smiling as much. We booked the trip hoping to breathe some life back into our marriage. I remember telling myself that this was it, our chance to reconnect, to find each other again in a new place, away from all the noise. I was hopeful, even excited in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But I had no idea that flight would change everything. The morning of the flight, everything felt pretty normal. We got through security, made it to the gate with time to spare. I tried to lighten the mood, cracked a few jokes, and for a second when Emily actually smiled I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe I'd let my insecurities get the best of me. But then she barely spoke after that. Just kept tapping away on her phone, completely absorbed. Normally we'd sit and talk, maybe share a coffee or people watch, but she was distant, fixated on whatever was happening on that screen. Every time I glanced over, she'd angle the phone away or lock it all together. I tried not to let it bother me too much. Told myself she was probably just texting a friend or double-checking reservations. But that uneasy feeling had been growing for weeks and now it was screaming at me. Once we boarded the plane and found our seats, I forced myself to stay positive. I figured I'd relax during the flight, maybe talk to her once we landed, try to get back to that place where we felt like partners again. I kept thinking, this is our shot. Just make it count. But the thing about instincts? They don't shut up just because you want them to. About an hour into the flight, Emily had drifted off to sleep, earbuds in, curled up against the window. I decided to stretch my legs a bit, clear my head. I walked toward the back of the plane, passing rows of people lost in their own little travel routines. Some watching movies, others flipping through magazines, a few already asleep. For a brief second it all felt ordinary. Until it didn't. As I neared the restroom area, something caught my eye. A phone, unlocked, sitting on a tray table in an empty seat. At first it didn't register. But then I looked again. It was Emily's phone. No doubt about it. Same case. Same lock screen photo. But how? And right there next to the phone was a guy. Maybe late 30s, clean cut, casually leaning against the wall, chatting with one of the flight attendants in a voice just low enough to make it hard to hear. I caught a few fragments though. Words like, didn't want to wake her, and, just make sure no one notices. My heart started racing. Something about the way he kept glancing at the phone like he was guarding it, made my stomach twist. And the look he gave the flight attendant, it wasn't innocent. It felt like they were sharing a secret. One I wasn't supposed to hear. I moved a little closer, stretching to make it seem casual, and then I heard him say it. Just let me know when she's awake. I don't want to interrupt her right now. Then he smiled again, quick, confident, and turned to walk back toward the front of the plane. I just stood there, stunned, frozen, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Why was her phone out here? Why was that guy acting like he knew her? And why did it feel like he knew a whole lot more about my wife than I did? I walked back to my seat trying to hold myself together, told myself I needed to calm down, that maybe there was an explanation I hadn't thought of. But deep down I already knew this wasn't just in my head. That look in his eyes, the words he used, it was all too personal. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. I slid back into my seat beside Emily, doing my best to act like nothing was bothering me. She was still asleep, her head gently resting against the window. I kept glancing over, hoping she'd open her eyes so I could ask if she knew anything about that guy I'd just seen. But then the words got stuck in my throat. What was I even supposed to say? Hey, I just saw some random guy talking to a flight attendant about not wanting to wake you. Know anything about that? It sounded ridiculous in my head. I didn't want to sound insecure or lose my cool if I was just connecting dots that weren't there. But it wouldn't leave me alone. That scene kept replaying in my head like a loop I couldn't pause. Who was that guy? Why did he have Emily's phone? If it was just a mix-up, why didn't he bring it back to her right away? And the way he said he didn't want to disturb her, that felt personal. Too personal. After sitting in silence for what felt like forever, I decided to do something I've never done in all our years together. I leaned slightly over, pretending to fidget with my seatbelt, and casually glanced into Emily's bag. No phone. My heart sank. That guy still had it. At that point, I started to feel like I was losing touch with reality. Every time a flight attendant passed, I scanned their movements, hoping I'd spot the man again, but it was like he vanished. I wanted so badly to get up and go look for him, but the last thing I wanted was to cause a scene mid-flight. Just when I was about to spiral, Emily stirred beside me. She let out a little yawn, stretched, and smiled. For a moment it felt normal. Like maybe the whole thing had just been a misunderstanding, maybe I really had overreacted. But then she reached into her bag, probably going for her phone, and I saw it. That quick flicker of confusion in her eyes. It was subtle, barely there, but I caught it before she had a chance to cover it up. Looking for something? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Oh, yeah. Just my phone, she said quickly, her tone a little too breezy. Probably left it in my jacket or something. She bent down to feel around beneath her seat, not really looking, just putting on a show. I'll find it later, she added, brushing it off like it was no big deal. But I knew Emily. Her phone was like an extension of her hand, she never misplaces it. That reaction? It didn't sit right. And suddenly, everything I'd been pushing aside came rushing to the front of my mind. As she leaned back, flipping through the airline magazine like nothing had happened, I made a silent decision. I wasn't going to let this pass. I needed answers. Even if it meant doing something uncomfortable. I pretended to focus on the in-flight movie, but I wasn't watching a second of it. My eyes kept flicking around the cabin looking for that guy. But he was nowhere in sight. Still, I knew what I had seen. I hadn't imagined it. I told myself that when the opportunity came, when Emily got up for the restroom or to stretch, I'd follow through. I'd go find that phone. If that man still had it, I'd find a way to confirm it. I had to. And it didn't take long. Roughly 15 minutes later, Emily leaned over and said she needed to use the bathroom. I nodded like everything was fine, watched her disappear down the aisle, and then I moved. I stood up quickly and walked toward the back, scanning the rows with nervous energy. And then I saw him. He was sitting toward the very back, a few rows behind where I had spotted him earlier. This time he was alone. And in his hand was a phone. My stomach twisted as I watched him swipe the screen, totally absorbed. I moved to the opposite row and lowered myself into an empty seat, pretending to tie my shoe. From that angle, I could just barely make out the screen's reflection in the window next to him. It wasn't clear, but I caught enough. There were messages, long ones, under a contact labeled simply E. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. This man was messaging my wife. On her phone. While she was sleeping beside me. I felt a wave of nausea rise up. All the signs I'd been ignoring, all the little changes in her behavior, it all started making sense. But I couldn't react. Not yet. If I went over and exploded, I'd lose the chance to see the full truth. I needed to know how deep this went. I needed to be sure. I sat there for a moment, hands shaking, heart pounding in my chest. Then I made a plan. I'd wait for Emily to return, and once she was settled, I'd go over and talk to the guy. Calmly. Casually. I'd ask if he'd found a phone, see how he reacted. If it was hers, if I confirmed that, then there was no more pretending. But no. Whatever happened after that, at least I'd finally have the truth. Because I was done lying to myself. I sat there trying to quiet the storm in my head, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. That same flight attendant, the one I'd seen talking with the guy earlier, suddenly got up from her seat at the back. She didn't look around casually like someone doing their job. No, she looked deliberate, like she was scanning for eyes. And then, without a word, she started heading toward the front of the plane, right in the direction Emily had gone. At first, I tried to talk myself out of the panic rising in my chest. Maybe she was just doing her rounds, checking the restrooms, whatever they're trained to do. But the way she walked, there was something calculated about it. She wasn't just passing through. She was headed somewhere with intent, like she already knew where she needed to be and what she needed to do. That familiar, creeping chill climbed up my spine again. My instincts were already screaming at me, but this only made it worse. I glanced back at the man who still had the phone, Emily's phone, and he was right where I'd left him. Comfortable. Still thumbing through the screen. But every few seconds he'd lift his eyes and look toward the aisle, like he was waiting on a signal. Or someone. I tried to stay calm. I really did. But I felt like I was in the middle of a puzzle that kept assembling itself in real time, each new piece making the picture clearer and darker. Then I saw it, the flight attendant slowing down as she reached the lavatory door. She paused there, her hand hovering for a moment before she leaned in close, like she was listening for something inside. My breath caught. What was she doing? Was she about to knock? Was she delivering a message? Everything in me wanted to jump up, to charge down that aisle and demand to know what was going on. But I was frozen. Not because I didn't want to know, because I was terrified of what I'd find if I did. The flight attendant tapped lightly on the door. Not loud. Not urgent. Just enough to be noticed. Almost like a code. A signal between people who already knew the rules. Then slowly the door cracked open. And there she was. Emily. Just her face peeking through. Her expression wasn't casual. She didn't look like a woman freshening up or stretching her legs. She looked startled. Guilty maybe. Caught off guard. There was a tension in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time, not since before we were married. The flight attendant leaned in close and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to. Emily nodded, just barely, before pulling the door shut again. And just like that, the attendant turned and walked back toward the rear, her face blank. Like nothing had happened at all. Like this was routine. I leaned back in my seat, but my body was trembling. My thoughts were spinning so fast I could barely think. That wasn't nothing. That wasn't some casual interaction. That was something planned, secretive, intimate. I sat there, eyes locked on the back of the plane, running through everything in my head. That look on Emily's face. The whispered words. The guy with her phone. It felt like watching a crack spread through glass, slow but steady until it finally shatters. I kept trying to push the doubt away. Maybe Emily had asked for tissues or mentioned feeling sick. Maybe the flight attendant was just helping her. Maybe. But I knew her. And I knew that wasn't it. I tried to breathe, tried to reason my way out of it, but my gut wouldn't let me. All those strange weeks suddenly made sense. The late nights. The distance. The way she guarded her phone like it held national secrets. I didn't have solid proof, not yet, but everything in me knew this wasn't some wild coincidence. I couldn't sit still anymore. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, forcing myself to walk steady as I made my way back toward the lavatory. Every step made my heart pound louder. The closer I got, the harder it was to breathe. When I reached the door, I noticed it wasn't fully shut. Just cracked slightly. Enough that if I listened closely, that's when I heard it. Emily's voice. Oh, cautious. Like she was trying not to be heard. And then another voice, deeper, unmistakably male, murmured something back. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. That was enough. There was someone in there with her. I stepped back like I'd been punched. My mind couldn't catch up with what my ears had just confirmed. She wasn't alone. She was with him. My wife. In that tiny restroom. And I was standing outside the door like a stranger. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It felt like the entire cabin fell away and I was suspended there, right in the moment when your whole world starts to fall apart. Then I heard her again, clearer this time. We can't be in here too long, she said softly. She sounded breathless. Uneasy. Not like someone trapped. But someone worried about getting caught. And that was it. Whatever shred of hope I was holding onto slipped right through my fingers. His voice came through the door, quiet but clear. Don't worry. Just relax. And that was it. I couldn't stand there another second. My hands clenched instinctively, and before I even had time to think, I knocked, hard. Not a gentle tap, but a firm, unmistakable knock that said, I'm here. I know. Everything went still. For a second it was like the plane stopped moving. Inside that small restroom I heard a scramble, shuffling, quick movements like two people trying to separate in a hurry. Then silence. And after what felt like forever, the door cracked open just a sliver. Emily peeked out. Her eyes locked onto mine and her whole face changed. Shock, fear, and something I couldn't quite read all collided in that one expression. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I didn't need to. I just stood there waiting, hoping maybe, for her to tell me I was wrong. That I'd misunderstood. That this wasn't what it looked like. But she didn't. She couldn't. And then the door opened a little wider and I saw him. Same guy. The one who'd been glued to her phone earlier. Now standing right there in front of me like this was normal, like it wasn't completely insane. His face. Calm. Almost smug. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look sorry. He looked like he'd already decided how this moment would go. I felt my chest tighten, a deep sickness rolling through me as the pieces all locked into place. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some awkward coincidence. It was real. And it had been happening right under my nose. I don't even remember making the decision. I just felt my voice explode out of me before I could stop it. What are you doing with my wife? I shouted, loud enough for the entire plane to hear. What are you both doing in the restroom together? Every head turned. It was like someone hit pause on the whole cabin. Passengers froze mid-bite, mid-sentence, just staring. Eyes wide. Mouths open. Some people whispered to each other. Others just watched, unsure whether to be concerned or entertained. Emily's face flushed deep red. She pushed past the guy, muttering something under her breath, eyes darting from one side of the aisle to the other like she was searching for an escape route. And then she practically ran down the aisle, back to our row, head down, avoiding every single stare. The guy didn't move. He just stood there for a second longer like he was testing me, seeing if I'd take it further. He didn't flinch. Didn't say a word. Just slowly turned and walked away as if he had nothing to explain. And right then I caught something out of the corner of my eye, the flight attendant from before. The one who had whispered to Emily. She didn't say a word either. Just quietly turned and vanished toward the rear of the plane. I was left standing in the middle of the aisle, fists still clenched, heart thudding in my ears, when another flight attendant came up beside me. Her voice was calm, practiced, but serious. "Sir," she said gently, "I need you to return to your seat. I understand you're upset, but we can't allow this kind of disruption during the flight." I looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Upset? I was coming apart. "You saw what just happened," I said, my voice cracking from emotion. "My wife, I couldn't even finish the sentence. She held up her hand, still speaking softly but firmly. "I understand really. But right now we're in the air. You can't handle this here. You'll have to wait until we land." And as much as I hated it, I knew she was right. There was no fixing this at 30,000 feet. Nothing I said right now would change what I'd just seen. I looked around again, everyone still staring, and I realized the longer I stood there, the worse it was going to get. I swallowed hard. "Fine," I muttered. "But this conversation isn't over." She gave me a quiet nod and gestured for me to head back. I made my way down the aisle, trying to ignore the eyes that followed me. Emily was already in her seat, pressed against the window like she could disappear into the clouds. She didn't look at me. Not once. Not even when I sat beside her, staring ahead, feeling like I was stuck in someone else's life. The rest of the flight dragged by like a punishment. She didn't say a word. Didn't apologize. Didn't explain. Just stared out the window like I wasn't even there. And finally, we landed. As soon as the seatbelt sign clicked off, I sat up straight, heart pounding again. Emily still hadn't moved. She just sat there, quiet and still, like she was trying to delay the moment we'd have to face each other. But I was done waiting. One way or another, I was going to get answers. I wasn't going to sit there and wait for her to say something. Not anymore. As the other passengers started standing up and pulling their bags from the overhead bins, I leaned in, close enough for only her to hear. "Go to hell, Emily." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just let each word carry the weight of everything I'd been carrying for weeks, maybe even years. "We're done. I don't want your explanations. I don't even want to hear your voice." She flinched like the words physically hit her. For a second, her lips parted like she was about to say something, but she didn't. She just stared down at her hands and gave this small, almost defeated nod. No defense. No denial. Maybe she realized there was nothing left to save. I turned away from her, 1,000 different emotions crashing over me all at once. I thought saying those words would feel like taking back control, like getting some piece of myself back. But instead, I just felt hollow. Like something had been ripped out of me, and all I was left with was silence and disbelief. As we started filing off the plane, I spotted him, Kevin. The man who had been sitting with my wife in a cramped airplane bathroom like they were entitled to rewrite the rules of decency. He was chatting quietly with one of the flight attendants near the back, all relaxed like he hadn't just blown up 2 marriages in the middle of a commercial flight. I couldn't help myself. I had to know who he was, what gave him the right to walk around like nothing happened. So I waited until he stepped off the plane, then made my way to the same flight attendant he'd been speaking to. She saw me coming and tensed up, like she expected me to make a scene. I didn't. I forced a calm I didn't feel and asked as evenly as I could, "Can I ask you something about the guy who was with my wife?" She hesitated, looked around nervously. "Sir, I'm really not supposed to talk about other passengers," she said. But then she looked at me a little longer, maybe seeing the weight behind my eyes. "But, what do you want to know?" "Who is he?" I asked. "That's all. I just need to know who he is." She glanced over her shoulder again, then leaned in slightly and spoke in a hushed tone. "His name's Kevin. He's one of the senior flight attendants. He usually does long-haul flights, international mostly." I blinked, stunned. "Wait, he works here? He's crew?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. And, look, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but he's married. 3 kids. His youngest was just born a few weeks ago. His wife probably has no idea what's going on." That last part hit me like a punch in the stomach. This wasn't some random hookup in the sky. This was a man with a family. A newborn baby. A wife who was likely at home, exhausted, healing, and trusting that her husband was doing his job. Instead, he was in a bathroom with my wife, risking not just his own marriage but mine too. And who knows how long it had been going on. Who knows how many other lies had been told. I walked off that plane feeling like the ground underneath me wasn't even real anymore. My mind was racing. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt like I was part of some ugly chain reaction that was going to rip through 2 families, maybe more. But I made a decision as I stepped onto the jet bridge. If Kevin was willing to risk his marriage to sneak around with Emily, I wasn't going to be the only one paying the price for it. I was going to make sure his wife, his family, knew exactly who he really was. I didn't waste time. As soon as we got to the hotel, I started digging. I didn't know where to start, but I had his name and his job, and with a little searching, the rest fell into place. His social media wasn't hard to find. Pictures of his daughters, family vacations, his wife smiling at the camera with that glow only new mothers have. Posts from just a few weeks ago about their baby girl's birth. It made me sick to my stomach. And then I found her, his wife. Let's call her Sarah. I stared at her profile for a long time before messaging her. I knew that reaching out would change everything for her. I knew I was about to burn her whole world to the ground. But I also knew what it felt like to be in the dark, to trust someone who's lying right to your face. I couldn't let her keep living in that lie. So I typed out a message. My hands were shaking as I hit send. Not out of regret, but out of the deep, aching sadness of what had to be done. Because if I had to learn the truth this way, raw, brutal, and 30,000 feet in the air, then at least she deserved the same chance to see the truth for herself. "Hi, Sarah. You don't know me, but I need to tell you something about your husband, Kevin. I'm sorry to do this out of nowhere, but I think you deserve to know, he was involved with my wife during a recent flight. If you want details, I'm here to talk." I stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what kind of reaction I was bracing for. Shock, denial, maybe an explosion of anger. Maybe she'd block me outright. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed with a reply that made me freeze. "Hi. Thanks for letting me know. I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm already aware. It's not what you think." I blinked at the screen trying to make sense of those words. Already aware? Before I could respond, another message came through. "Kevin and I have an open relationship. We've been transparent with each other about it for a long time. We each have our freedom. As long as we're honest, we do what we want. He provides for our family, takes care of the kids, and that's enough for me." I just sat there, staring at the screen like it was written in another language. It didn't compute. I had gone into that conversation thinking I was about to uncover a scandal, thinking I'd be the one to pull the curtain back. But instead, it was like I'd stepped into a world where none of the rules I lived by even applied. She knew. She was okay with it. I couldn't understand. My whole life had just cracked apart, and this woman treated it like it was just a lifestyle choice. Like it was no big deal that her husband had been sneaking around with mine, on a plane no less. Still, I typed back, struggling to wrap my head around it. I don't get it. He's sleeping with other people and you're just okay with that." There was a long pause before she answered. "I know it's hard to understand if it's not your world. But yes, this is how we live. Kevin loves our family. He's a good father and we're happy with our arrangement. I'm truly sorry for what you're going through, but I think it's something you and your wife need to deal with between you." I sat back numb. Whatever I thought I was doing, trying to right a wrong, maybe salvage a little justice, it had all evaporated. I wasn't delivering some crushing truth. I was just catching up to something they'd already accepted. For them, this wasn't betrayal. It was just agreement. Lifestyle. boundaries they'd both signed off on. And that unsettled me in a way I didn't expect. Because for me this was betrayal. It was personal. Life-altering. I realized then that I wasn't going to get closure from Kevin or his wife. There was nothing to shatter. The only life that had come apart was mine. But still there was something I couldn't shake. Kevin might have had his wife's permission, but he was still on the clock. He was still wearing a uniform, getting paid to represent an airline while he was locking himself in a lavatory with my wife. That wasn't just some private arrangement, that crossed a line. So I took a different path. I went to the airline's website. I found their feedback and complaint section and I wrote down every detail I could remember: names, seat numbers, what I witnessed, what I heard, how it made me feel. I described how one of their senior crew members was using his position and uniform to engage in something deeply inappropriate during a flight. I wasn't out to destroy his life, but I wasn't going to let him walk away like it meant nothing either. I explained how it made me feel as a passenger, how it affected the atmosphere of the flight, and how other people, complete strangers, were left staring at my broken marriage play out in real time, midair. I told them how professionalism had completely crumbled the moment Kevin decided his own impulses mattered more than the comfort and dignity of the people on board. When I finished writing, I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I hit send. I didn't expect a response. I knew how these big companies worked: everything filtered, everything processed, everything sanitized. Maybe it'd land in someone's inbox and disappear into some HR vacuum. But I had to try. It was the only way I felt like I was doing something. Because even if Kevin's wife didn't care and my wife didn't care, I did. And I wasn't going to sit in the wreckage alone without speaking up. About a week later, I got an email I hadn't expected to see. It was from the airline's customer service team. At first, it looked like every other standard response. Formal, polite, the kind of thing companies send out to smooth things over. But then I kept reading, and I sat up straight. They hadn't brushed it off. They'd actually taken it seriously. They told me that, based on the information I provided, they opened an internal investigation. And here's the part that made my jaw tighten. They said this wasn't the first time they'd received concerns about Kevin's behavior. My complaint, they said, was the breaking point. He was being disciplined. Not just a slap on the wrist either. Kevin was officially being pulled from his position as a senior flight attendant. No more international routes, no more seniority perks. They were reassigning him to ground duty, stripped of the prestige he'd built his reputation on. That bathroom stunt with my wife? It finally caught up to him. I didn't expect to feel anything when I read it, but I did. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vengeance. It was validation. Proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. That what happened mattered. That there were consequences, even for people who thought they could do whatever they wanted. Kevin could still play by his open relationship rules if he wanted to. But he wasn't going to do it with a pair of wings pinned to his chest, not anymore. Not while pretending to be a professional in front of other passengers. As for Emily, things had been cold and quiet ever since we got off that flight. She crashed at a friend's place for a few nights and then, finally, we had the conversation we both knew was coming. She tried to explain. Said it got messy. Said she didn't mean for any of it to go that far. She looked tired, maybe even ashamed, but I didn't care anymore. Whatever version of us she was trying to salvage was already long gone. The words didn't land because my heart wasn't there to catch them. Too many cracks. Too many lies. And I didn't want to spend another day wondering if I was sleeping beside someone who had already left the marriage in her heart. We filed for divorce not long after. It was clean, at least logistically, no kids, no massive legal mess. Just 2 signatures on a stack of papers that used to mean something. When it was over, I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt hollow. Like the foundation I'd been building my life on had quietly rotted beneath me, and I was only just now standing in the wreckage. I didn't get my wife back. I didn't get my old life back. But I got something else, space to breathe. Kevin lost his wings. Emily lost her marriage. And I lost the illusion I'd been clinging to for years, that love, if it looked good on the outside, must be strong on the inside. But maybe the most unexpected part of all was what I found in that wreckage. A kind of peace. A rough, unfinished kind. But it was real. Now I'm rebuilding. Alone, yes. But with open eyes.